when he said that there's a one on the way. Peyton, you better make sure that you... All right. I already have Peyton shaking his head. I appreciate Peyton taking the day off of work to be able to come and hear me speak, so I've got to pick on him a little bit. It is such a joy being here. I don't know that you could recognize what a joy it is. We had to cancel last year because of going to get Tyler's and Tabby's children since Tabby was sick. Poor baby has gone through so much, but she's turned a real important corner. And if there are no complications, we expect there won't be too many months before that beautiful family of four will be able to be that family unit again, which we desire, look forward to, and of course they desire so much. So continue to pray, if you will, concerning Tabby and Tyler, that things will continue to improve and that can happen as soon as possible. A lot of people talk to Lavinia and myself about keeping the children, and it's a joy to keep them. I do realize more than I ever realized before why God gave babies to young people, but we are so thankful that we were able to step in and help them and look forward, of course, to the continued help as long as they need it. Appreciate you being here this morning. You could be sleeping. It looks like maybe some of you already are, but anyway, I'll tell you, because some of you have wondered why we're here, thinking maybe we shouldn't have come, but I talked to the doctor, and he asked me if my speaking would make me nervous or tense, and I thought, not at all. He said, well, if your speaking does not make you tense, of course I didn't say it might make you all tense, but it didn't make me tense and I would fly, then I could come. So I have doctor's permission. For all those of you who think I shouldn't be here, I should be here. I'm right where I need to be, and I'm thankful for the elders allowing me to be here, inviting me to be here, and of course, so thankful for Lavinia and her care of me. You know that she's younger than I am, and people used to make fun of me for marrying someone younger, and I told them, well, you just wait. I'll have somebody take care of me when I'm sick, and you won't, because she'll be sick with you. Proven right. So thankful for her and what all she does. My subject is, will we recognize one another in heaven? This is a controversial subject in some people's mind, but I could go ahead and cut the lesson short if you want me to and just say yes. There's just too much evidence in the Scriptures, too many examples for one to say that we will not recognize one another. And I don't know the parameters. You know, somebody that is not faithful, am I going to remember them? Am I going to recognize them? Well, I kind of doubt that, but God is the God of heaven, and God can do whatever He will, and He can bless me in however He will, as long as I follow what He says for me to do. And so I believe it's a very positive thing that we'll recognize one another. Inspired James said in James 2:26, for as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so faith without work is dead also. By deduction from this, we recognize that life then is the union of the body and spirit, and death is their separation. And so one of these days, if Christ doesn't come first, we're going to die from something. And we're going to change. We're going to be spiritual beings. And so it puzzles me sometimes, and I try to think about it. Again, how is that going to happen? We're going to be spiritual beings. How are we going to recognize one another? Well, the indication is that we will, and that's just something we need to accept, that we will. And I want to begin with the inspired words of John in Revelation 6, 9, and 10. I'm kind of going backwards as far as looking at the verses. But in Revelation 6, 9, when he had opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, how long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood in them that dwell on the earth? These are personalities that are speaking out, and they recognize that they're dead. They had a consciousness of their surroundings. They knew why they were there, and they knew they had been murdered, and they were questioning as to when are you going to take care of that? When are you going to punish them? So there was some recognition there, wasn't there? Again, knowing that they had been murdered, when are you going to take care of that? It's a little scary questioning God in that manner, but He did. Sometimes we need to be very careful. I think people go astray because of not having answers to things that they want answers for. And the Bible gives us what it wants us to know, and we need to just listen to that. Perry B. Cotham, in his book Beyond the Sunset, said, to the Christian, a glorious and eternal reunion with those gone before awaits. This is clearly brought out in the writings of the Apostle Paul when he said that he would be made happy in heaven to know that those whom he had converted and remained faithful and would be among the saved. And he takes that from Philippians chapter 2 and verse 16, holding forth the word of life, that I may rejoice in the day of Christ, that I have not run in vain, neither labored in vain. Think about the number of people that you have taught. Think about the number of people that will be in heaven partially because of you and the teaching, the truth that you have done. Won't it be grand to be able to recognize those individuals who listened to the gospel, that we had a part in them hearing it and they obeyed it? I think about heaven. Think about the foolishness of some of the speakers talked about the people wanting to live on this earth, renovated earth. I have a sister that is Jehovah's Witness, so I've heard that a lot from them, but it is appalling for the brethren to start going off in those silly things. And so I wonder what they're thinking. I wonder why in the world they would want to live here. I like this earth. I'm glad that I'm still here to be able to enjoy my family and my friends. I hope that I'm here longer, but whenever I'm gone, I'm thankful that there will be a home for me, and that I will recognize those that are there that I knew, and that maybe I'll be able to recognize those who I've influenced and my family has influenced in teaching the gospel. And we all want that, of course. We need to make sure that we are faithful, though. What good is it going to do for somebody to recognize me or for me to recognize somebody else if I'm not faithful? And that's one of the questions that comes up concerning this. How can we be happy if we recognize someone who is not faithful? Well, God will deal with that. I don't know how He's going to work it out, but He says that that is the case. Now, all of us remember King David. He's one of the greatest examples here, of course, based upon his understanding and his teaching. We remember his sin with Bathsheba, 2 Samuel 11, 1 through 5. I've had a lot of people wonder in my presence, how could David be a man after God's own heart when he commits such a sin? Well, humankind makes mistakes. Sometimes they're horrible mistakes. Sometimes they're little mistakes. He recognized later, of course, when he was confronted with it, that it was sinful, but he had convinced himself that he wanted Bathsheba to the point that he would even have one of his soldiers, one of his faithful soldiers, the husband, of course, of her husband, killed. I don't know that anybody's going to think that they're going to cause someone to be killed. Well, if he'd have been fulfilling his responsibility as the king and been in battle with his soldiers, then this wouldn't have happened. But he put himself in that situation. And we think about Uriah. Think about, again, the faithfulness that he had toward the king, how he had him killed. And then you'll remember, of course, Nathan's rebuke of David in 2 Samuel 12, 1 through 14. And that statement, thou art the man, and of course the immediate recognition that David had and that he was willing to repent, and that's the reason he was a man after God's own heart, not because he was perfect, not because he never made any mistakes, but because when he was confronted and he recognized it, he didn't think of Nathan as his enemy, as so many times is the case today. But he recognized it, and so then he began to repent of those things. You remember, of course, David's child, that the child is sick and that he mourns. 2 Samuel 12, 15 through 17 talks about Nathan departed unto his house, and the Lord struck the child with that Uriah's wife bare unto David, and it was very sick. And I'm not going to read all the verses, but you'll remember that then he began to mourn. His servants tried to get him to get up and eat, and he wouldn't do it. But then they were surprised in 2 Samuel 12, 18 through 20 about him getting up and cleansing himself, worshiping and eating after the child had died. And of course you'll remember that he then reminded them of the situation. Then said his servants in 2 Samuel 12 in verse 21, then said his servants unto him, what thing is it that thou hast done? Thou didst fast and weep for the child while it was alive, but when the child was dead, you didst rise and eat bread. Verse 22, and he said, while the child was yet alive, I fasted and wept, for I said, and who can tell whether God will be gracious to me that the child may live? He wanted the child to live, and so he mourned and he wept, and he, I'm sure, asked God to spare the child. But then verse 23, but now he is dead, wherefore should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me. Well, David understood that. It's something we need to understand as well. And so we train our children so that they will be what God would have them to be. So then we strive to be what God would have us to be. That being the case, we'll recognize that child. We'll recognize that loved one based upon these examples. Memory of actions and past life indicates the ability to know one another in heaven. Again, I will quickly say I don't know how it's going to work, but that's God's job, and God will fulfill what He has said that He will do. And then all of us know the account of the rich man and Lazarus in Luke 16, verses 19 through 31. And again, there's no need to read all that, even if my lesson ends up being a short lesson. It's just a reminder of these things that we already know. We'll read chapter 16, verse 23. Of course, you have the rich man, you have Lazarus, and Lazarus is a beggar, wanting the crumbs from the rich man's table, and they both die. Verse 23, and in hell he lifts up his eyes, being in torments, and seeth Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom. When I was in the hospital and my mind was going in and out, there were times I didn't know where I was, there were times that I did, but it's kind of interesting to me. I'd been preparing this lesson, and I don't remember when I thought this, but I remember thinking about presenting this lesson. And for a second I thought, well, if I don't get out of this, then I can know for sure whether we can recognize people in heaven. And I can let the brethren know. And then just as quickly as I thought that, I remember there's a great gulf fix. I couldn't tell. I'm going to be in Abraham's bosom. I couldn't tell you anyway. And so you just have to look at the examples and have to think about those things. But I was somewhat amazed that I thought of needing to do this lesson. I'm sure glad that I had already prepared because it had been hard for me to prepare otherwise. But anyway, he's in Lazarus in Abraham's bosom. You remember that the wealthy man cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. Here's the rich man. He sees Lazarus afar off in Abraham's bosom, and his first request is for that drop of water. Send Lazarus to dip his finger in water, and I'm in this torment, I'm in this anguish. You think about how bad that is. I'm not talking about heaven and hell specifically, but for one to think that just a drop of water is going to help very much when he's in such anguish, such pain, it's not going to work that way, is it? We need, of course, keep that in mind. In verse 25, but Abraham said, Son, remember. That's the key word, remember. Remembering brings back so many wonderful things, or sometimes hard things. And so here, this remembering is not necessarily a positive thing for him. Remember. Verse 26, and besides all this, between us and you there is a great gulf fixed, so that they which would pass from hence to you cannot, neither can they pass to us that would come from thence. Verse 27, then he said, I pray thee therefore, Father, that thou wouldest send him to my father's house. I mean, that's a very interesting thing. Here he is in torments, but he remembers his brothers. And so there again is memory that is involved here. I pray thee therefore, Father, that thou wouldest send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brethren, that he may testify unto them, lest also they also come into that place of torment. He remembered his brethren. He did not want his brethren to end up there. But it was too late, right? They had the opportunity, and they were not listening. And so he says in verse 31, if they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rose from the dead. There are people that are always looking for things where they're not to be found. I grew up being a member of the Baptist church, but also went to a number of churches of God with my family. And it always was interesting to me the things that were being said, the things that were taken out of context. And I'm very thankful that there are those who taught me that, and I recognize the truth. My memory is to be a positive thing if I'm faithful. But my memory probably will not be a positive thing if I'm not. In Luke 16, verse 25, again, remember. But Abraham said, Son, or remember that thou in thy lifetime receivest thy good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and thou art tormented. Memory, as I said, shows recognition, and I want to think a moment about the comparison here. You had the good things on earth, and Lazarus didn't. But again, the latter part of the verse, but now he is comforted, and thou art tormented. Do you like to be tormented? None of us do. We want to be comforted. And the indication here is that we can be. We should be, but it's going to be how we live. It's going to be what we remember. And we remember based upon things that we have done, based upon things that we hope to do. I think about my family. None of them have ever obeyed the gospel. It tears my heart up. But I can't make them. I don't try to make them. I'm not going to try to make them in the future. But it causes me to mourn every time that I have talked to one of my siblings and they have rejected the truth. I'll never forget years ago when my oldest brother and I got together for the last time. I was with him on the Eugene River and Savannah River. He was a crabber. And I tried to teach him again, and the last thing he said to me concerning those things is, well, I don't believe that baptism is necessary for salvation. And I'll go to my grave believing that. 6 weeks later, he was dead. I don't think that I'm going to have that memory, because how could I enjoy that? But again, that's something God will deal with. He indicates that we will know one another. And my favorite, I've saved till the last, Matthew 17, 1 through 5, the Transfiguration. If that doesn't tell us that we will remember each other in heaven, I don't know what would. But beginning in verse 1, Matthew 17, and after 6 days Jesus taketh Peter, James, and John his brother, and bringeth them up into a high mountain apart, and was transfigured before them, and his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light. And behold, there appeared unto them Moses and Elias, talking with him. Then answered Peter and said unto Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If thou wilt, let us make 3 tabernacles, for thee, and one for Moses, and one for Elias. And then one of the most important verses in the Bible is verse 5. While he yet spake, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and behold, a voice out of the cloud, which said, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him. Very clear that these men recognized one another. Some of them were dead, some of them weren't, but they recognized one another. And they became erroneous in their thinking and building tabernacles for each one, because Christ, of course, is the one the tabernacle needed to be built for. Hear ye him. So if we hear him, if we listen to what he says, we do what he says, we obey the gospel and are faithful to it, won't it be a joy to be with him? And to recognize those faithful prophets that went before us? To recognize those faithful brethren who've gone on before us? I, of course, have not worked with this congregation specifically in the sense of living here and working with it, but I can recognize empty seats of a number of brethren. Oak Grove, I can think in my mind's eye of a number of people where their seat is now empty, and it's a sad thing for us, but it's a joy when we know that person is a faithful Christian. We know that we will be able to remember them. We know that we'll be able to recognize them when we pass, as long as they were faithful. So it is that we need to think about these things. We need to be encouraged by it. We may not understand it all. We may not understand how it is that we can have joy when some of our family members are not faithful, or some of our brethren have become unfaithful. But all we can do is try to make sure that we're faithful, so that when our time passes, we'll be able to remember those faithful brethren. We'll be able to rejoice together. Won't that be wonderful? Wonderful song leading, by the way. But that's nothing compared to what the Bible talks about heaven. And a big part of that is the rejoicing together, recognizing one another. I don't look forward to the time that I pass. I have so many things to live for. Look forward to that. But I do have the desire that I will be faithful, so that I'll be able to recognize you, and you'll be able to recognize me in that time beyond the sunset. Thank you for your attention. I hope this has been beneficial to you. Let's work together, go to heaven together, so that we can remember one another and enjoy praising God together. Thank you very much.